Now that we've finished our Unit 3 presentations and received some closure on the Civil War, where you lost over 600,000 people, what do you do with all of the states that have seceded? Do you act like nothing happened and they can come back into the Union? The problem with doing that is that now ending slavery has pretty much been established. That's what's going to happen with the 13th Amendment in 1865. And slavery is so interwoven inside Southern society and their state constitutions and their local laws that some changes have to be made. You also have to ask yourself, what do you do with all of these people that clearly were treasonous and traitors and they violated the law? So that gets us into Reconstruction. Lincoln surprisingly thought as early as 1863 and puts forward a plan for how these former Confederate states are going to come back into the Union. So the reason that you have to do something, make these states make these changes is because if you remember the Emancipation Proclamation, will free slaves in rebel states, but after the war, you can clearly see with the 13th Amendment that slavery is going to be abolished. And this is literally almost exactly what you need to write on your constructive response on the final. So it allows for African Americans to fight. It really didn't free a single slave. It encourages African Americans to help the Union cause. Even if you are stuck on a plantation in the South, you can still do what you can to help for the cause because you know that one day you will be free. And like I said, it changes the goals of the war. Lincoln put forward a plan, like I said, in 1863, and many people criticized him for being too lenient. He only required 10% of those that voted in 1860 to take a loyalty oath and to agree to follow the federal laws. Even Congress wasn't happy with that because they wanted at least 50%. So Lincoln's assassination left things really unclear, and it allowed for this leeway for Southerners to figure out they could do what they wanted to do. The Freedmen's Bureau, you had slaves that were denied the right to be educated. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, and you couldn't teach a slave to read or write, even though some did. And you will see that Congress will provide at least relief, education, rationing. Because if you were in slavery your entire life, what do you have at the end of when slavery is over? You really don't have anything. There was this idea that many people thought that like former slaves would get 40 acres and a mule, and they really didn't get much of anything, and that's going to lead to some problems in Reconstruction. So you will see former slaves are flocking to these schools in the evening. Children are going during the day because they have this thirst and this desire to be educated. Andrew Johnson, vice president under Lincoln, people were like, this guy is great. He's from Tennessee. He is going to kind of be the one to show everybody, hey, Southerners can get along and come back into the Union. But he clearly was a disappointment. He was not like a huge plantation owner. And we find out that he envied them so much that when any former plantation owner or high-ranking Confederate official would appeal to Johnson, he'd be like, sure, I pardon you. So his plan was really similar to Lincoln's, but like I said, he would pardon really anybody that asked him, and you have a real problem that develops. These radical Republicans, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, and Ben Wade, these men are dedicated to and passionate about former slaves getting equal rights, not just ending slavery, but getting equality for them and really changing the structure and fabric of the United States. So the problem is Johnson pardoned so many people that even the vice president of the Confederate States of America shows up for the congressional session. And Southerners will also pass black codes, and these laws really put former slaves in a very similar state that they were in slavery. Like they would say, former slaves cannot own a dog, cannot own guns. And it really, in many people's mind, undermined the 13th Amendment. And you see these radical Republicans are like, no way, this is not going to happen. They literally are going to lock these guys out and say, go away. They are going to override Johnson's veto. They're going to refuse to seat these Southern congressmen. They have a new Freedmen's Bureau that's going to hopefully help former slaves more, and they're going to have a new amendment, our second Reconstruction Amendment, the 14th Amendment, that's going to grant all people citizenship rights. They, again, are going to continuously insist that former slaves need to be given civil rights and that the federal government needs to enforce that. So what they did is they will pass the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867, and you see that when the military is there, that people will follow the law. When the military is not there, the KKK will be in power and they will take away people's rights. Southern slaves are going to have to rewrite their state constitutions, which they are going to be forced to do. And the Army, if they have an area where the Klan has a lot of activity, they're going to go and they're going to arrest people. And when they do, you see Klan membership and activity will decline. So if you see here the military districts that were set up in the South, and you think like, okay, the Civil War just ended. How come the military has to come and force people to follow the law? You see that a lot of Southerners are not going to want to admit that they're wrong. And because of Lincoln's assassination, the constant fighting between Johnson and Congress, that they have that leeway to say, okay, we can probably get away with some things and really not end slavery and change our way of life. Johnson was impeached, just like Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton in the House, though. The vote was 35-18. And again, why was he impeached? Like, he violated the Tenure of Office Act, but even that law was a little shady. It says that a president can't remove a member of his own cabinet without the consent of Congress. The bottom line here is Congress did not like Johnson. He was not doing everything he could to guarantee African American rights, and he seemed to side with Southerners. So the next year that he could be elected is 1868, and we're going to give that one to Ulysses S. Grant. So Johnson will be a one-term president, but again, he just took over after Lincoln was assassinated. So some of the greatest achievements, obviously the 13th Amendment, we can add that because slavery has been abolished. It's more of a war measure, but we have the 14th and the 15th Amendment. The 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship rights, and the 15th Amendment guaranteed African American men the right to vote. You also see that for the first time, some African Americans are allowed to participate in public life, be politicians, and you do see the readmission of Southern states. You don't have a seceded part of the country. Everybody now is a part of the Union. So if you look here in the purple, you can see Black members are participating in constitutional conventions, which have to be rewritten in the South because, like I said, slavery was so intertwined with their laws. And then white members, and you see Tennessee was restored to the Union in 1866. Okay, the failure of Reconstruction. Southerners are going to be violently opposed to Black rights, and many of them are going to almost like in their heads kind of recreate this, oh, slavery was so awesome. I remember how much I loved my slaves, and vice versa. They're going to erect a lot of like statues that you see. Some of them have been questioned in the last year about how should we still keep these up without any type of signage explaining it. Many in the North were kind of like indifferent about it. You see a huge rise in the KKK, and you see the KKK will work right along with the Democratic Party in the South, which the Democratic Party is against really Reconstruction, is against African Americans gaining their rights. Like I said, when the Army was present, the KKK were apprehended, they were imprisoned, and there really is no land reform. So if you were a former slave, besides getting some like basic clothing and food for a while, you get nothing. There are schools that you can attend, but you can see again the tenure of these schools, longevity of these schools are going to be short-lived. So it really seems like, why did all of these people die? Why did we fight the Civil War? And it will be nearly 100 years until African Americans are going to be guaranteed their rights that you actually have on paper in the book, on the books, but they're not enforced at all. So like what they have now instead of slavery, they call it sharecropping. So this is a really good chart to kind of show you that. So you can see like during slavery at the top left, you see the close proximity of the slave quarters to the plantation or the house, and you see that sharecroppers cannot leave their former slaves and they cannot leave the plantation. So they're going to negotiate a deal with their former plantation owner. So you can see their houses are more spread out, but in many cases they're still working for their former master. So I always think, like, if I was living during this time period, couldn't I just hightail it and get out of there? Well, no, you couldn't, because a police officer or sheriff or whatever would see you if you were out kind of on the road, or, hey, who are you? And they would apprehend you, and you will see that you'll be taken back. So you are like tied to the land, and you have a very similar situation that you did before slavery or during slave times. So, and you also think, well, if you get to vote, will people, why can't you use that right to vote to get new people in power? The problem is there was really no secret ballot at all at this time. So if you would go and vote, you better vote for the Democratic Party. If not, they would know it, and they would, go come after you that night. So you get a situation where many blacks are just not going to vote because they knew they had to vote for the Democratic Party, when in turn they wanted to vote for the Republican Party, which wanted to give them rights. You see, unfortunately, in the South, that white supremacy will reign, and they will do everything they can to suppress African American votes and to keep them in the similar situation that they were in with slavery. Grant actually surprisingly did a decent job at trying to enforce Reconstruction. He was totally happy and fine with sending the military down to the South, which he did. His problem was he was always plagued with scandals, like was mentioned in a presentation today. He was a decent guy, but the people around him, like his friends, were pretty scandalous. The Republican Party is really divided. So I would say by even the early 1870s, people were like, okay, let's get over it. Let's move on past this Reconstruction and do something else and focus on other issues. So if you see here, what really is kind of going to seal the deal is the election of 1876 between Hayes and Tilden. And you will see this as a contested election, meaning, in various states, they don't, after the election, they don't know who won. There's going to be this like backdoor meeting because the election was so close, this backdoor meeting that will allow for a winner, which would be Hayes, even though he clearly didn't win the popular vote, but Reconstruction would end, meaning troops would withdraw from the South. When they leave the South, you will see that Southerners are going to have the freedom to do what they want, and they again will impose and create a society based on white supremacy that really will be untouched until the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. So you can see a little bit of part of that compromise there that allowed for Reconstruction to really end. All right, so this brings us to an exciting topic, your second quarter DBQ. So juniors write a DBQ each quarter. Like every junior does that. This is not something that I am, super excited about for you, but it is good to look at documents and kind of place yourself back in history. So the question is, was Reconstruction a new birth of freedom for African Americans? So understand, even though Reconstruction was a failure, it's asking you, was there a new birth of freedom? Did anything change? So your response really could be like, yes, it was a new birth of freedom, or no, it wasn't. Or you can even say somewhat, but you need at least 3 main points, intro and conclusion, which will get you to a 5-paragraph essay. Now, talk about how nice we are. You have a background essay on the Gettysburg Address and also some background information with really a ton of outside sources. Like, you don't have to answer those questions, but you can use that, anything in the Gettysburg Address or background information, as outside evidence if it's not anywhere in the docs. And you would need, I'm sure that ends there, 5 docs and 5 outside key terms. One thing I think overall that I know that you guys need to work on is, one, make sure that you are bringing in like an equal amount of docs and evidence that you already know. So where are you going to get the evidence that you know? From this, voila, that you just heard me talk for about 15 minutes, and also from background information. You don't have to do research. You don't do a works cited. That's all you. I'll put some resources